When a show or film has a well-produced action scene, the often flashy, brutal, imaginative, or well-shot sequences are things I see fans reminisce about like they do with their favorite characters or plot events. But when I see them, I just tend to watch. I don't think bad of them in the least, it's more that I just don't know about fight choreography. While I could stand to look into the more subtle differences between the good and the bad, until then the big flashy scenes aren't doing much for me beyond making me nod my head and go, yeah, that was pretty good, I guess. Until then, I want to talk about what I do like in a fight. When it comes to my favorites, there isn't much action to be found, but one of the exceptions I enjoy for its action would be Jojo's Bizarre Adventure. Jojo fights have a deliberate, slow pacing to them, and the results tend to be pretty long. It's not unusual for a single fight to stretch across an entire volume, even before the series switched to longer monthly chapters. This treatment isn't reserved for particularly important or climactic fights either, sometimes it's just regular ones. Now, one by one, we're going to break down a few fights from the franchise and see what makes them tick. Of course, these encounters are going to get spoiled, so it shouldn't be too surprising when the protags win. In Stardust Crusaders, we are introduced to the concept of stands, specters with unique powers who stand by their user. Our first fight starts off with Polnareff, the user of Silver Chariot, who's in the middle of a hotel visit before being ambushed by Devo, user of the stand Ebony Devil. When the verbal exchange becomes physical, Devo takes damage, backing off while claiming everything's going as planned. After taking a cut from behind, Polnareff lets his guard down, unaware of the danger in the form of a possessed doll. Sure enough, while chasing a key hidden under the bed, Polnareff is trapped in a compromised position and effectively blinded. Given that he's unable to perceive things through his stand, he's at a huge disadvantage against Devo's remote-controlled abilities. Cut off from any help, Polnareff does the best he can, but even after briefly trapping Devo, the small puppet proves too agile in his smaller form. Devo enters his endgame, spilling liquid so they might commit murder through electrocution. Before he can finish the job, Polnareff lands a perfect strike, spotting him through the pieces of broken mirror he'd scattered around earlier, stopping Devo in his tracks. Now, let's look back at the fight. Not only can we divide it up by the typical act structure, but I'm going to be applying a few terms to make it clear what I'm looking for in each one. Act 1 is the introduction phase, which builds a setting where the fight takes place and often gives a brief look at the abilities of the antagonist, though not always. It also contains the lead up to the scenario phase, the inciting incident where the stake is raised, amping up the tension. Following is the exchange phase, the bulk of Act 2. Here, the antagonist is trying to achieve their goals, usually involving the death of the protagonist, while our hero tries to find a path to victory. Then, when things look the bleakest, we've hit the end of Act 2 in the stress phase. Then, with the twist and payoff, the protagonist reveals their hand and achieves victory in Act 3, finishing off the fight. For me, the twist and payoff are the crux of a good JoJo fight. I use the term twist here because it works much like a plot twist. While I was unable to locate the original source, I have a quote that sums it up rather nicely. When it happens, the twist needs to be the last thing the audience would think to occur, but in retrospect it has to be the only thing that could have happened. A good twist is one that feels obvious after the fact because the signs were all there, you just didn't notice them the first time through. Back to Polnareff. The introduction clues us into the doll before Polnareff notices it, and the setting is simple but effective. The hotel room gives the two fighters a lot of things to work with, from the lamp cord to the hairdryer to the mirror. Devo's abilities are easy enough to understand, and he only explains how they took effect in the first place. For me, the setup with the mirror was subtle enough that while I had read the manga before, watching the episode for the first time, I'd forgotten how he was going to win until he did. The twist also fits the scenario. Devo is shown to be agile even when Polnareff was within range, so having him get hit when he thought he was safe was probably the only real way Polnareff could have won. And that's what it's about. Given that his character arc isn't finished yet, the audience knows Polnareff isn't going to die, but it's the how that's more interesting when it comes to his victory. While this is a good fight, as the series goes on, abilities grow stranger and more complex, so let's see how the formula has evolved. 12 years after the end of Stardust Crusaders, we get to Steel Ball Run. While Polnareff's abilities were rather simple, the main character for this fight, Gyro Zeppeli, can throw spinning steel balls and even see from them when used alongside his stand, Turbo. With the well-placed strike, he can also map out certain structures, usually the human skeleton, which folds into his anatomy knowledge as a former executioner. Alongside him are Johnny Joestar, who shoots nail bullets, and Hot Pants, whose cream starter can manipulate liquid flesh. In the middle of the titular horse race, the three are trapped near an old cabin in the woods by Ringo Rodigan. During the intro, after an encounter with a minor character, we find out that Ringo is a good shot with a pistol and he has a sense of honor and a strong confidence. Suspecting him of being the force trapping them in the woods, the group plans on ambushing him if he refuses to let them leave. Finishing the introduction phase, he's rather forthcoming, explaining how he's keeping the group trapped while confident he can't be beat as long as it's a fair duel. He states that his ability, Mandem, can rewind time for 6 seconds when he rotates the dial on his watch, yet memory of said lost time remains for all parties. After backing up his words and trouncing the three of them in a duel despite it being stacked against him, Ringo leaves Gyro to deal with another layer onto the scenario. Both Johnny and Hot Pants are unconscious, the former captured, and Ringo is certain Gyro can't respond to his ability. After Ringo is given some backstory, Gyro encounters this fight's stress, but his drive perseveres through his mental conversations with his father. Now, Gyro enters the exchange once again. He blasts Ringo through the cabin wall, mapping out his skeleton and finding a weak point he can use to paralyze Ringo's left side. While Ringo rewinds time, Gyro knows enough, bursting into duel. They exchange, and while Ringo is hit in the shoulder, he's able to spin his dial with a bullet, setting them back to just after Gyro kicked in the door. Gyro throws again, and Ringo moves defensively. Though he seems to block the ball, it turns out Gyro had memorized the pieces of airborne wood before the rewind, striking one and driving it into Ringo's weak point, cementing his win. While the introduction serves as a good hint as to Ringo's powers, his explanation fits with his honorable personality. The scenario has higher stakes than I saw fit to mention due to video length, and the stress factors into that, as Gyro has stakes in the race beyond the life of his traveling companion Johnny. Ringo's weakness in his shoulder might feel a bit contrived, but the way that Ringo gets around it and the way that Gyro wins are satisfying enough for me to look past it. If I had a gripe, I would point out that the author, Araki, doesn't draw the stake in Ringo's arm until the panel he wants you to see it, even though you should be able to see it earlier on the page. Overall, it's a standout fight, and though the pieces are shifted, it still holds true to the formula while also being a bit more complex through its characters, their motives, and their abilities. Now, let's take a look at a fight from much earlier in the franchise from before Stands. During battle tendency in a military base owned by Nazi Germany in Mexico, an ancient super vampire named Santana is awakened. His body can devour flesh with a touch, his shape is malleable, and his mind is more adept to learning than humans. Joseph Joestar uses Haman, which can protect him, but its offensive abilities, which mimic the sun's rays, can't damage Santana directly due to his unusual skin. That is reason enough for Santana to be wary of Joseph's continued existence, setting up the scenario. The base's leader, Stroheim, wants Joseph to kill Santana, and when he endangers Speedwagon, Joseph is in no position to refuse. Through the exchange phase, Joseph continues trying to find a way to damage Santana until he manages to rip him in half. Since that isn't enough, Joseph has to drag him out into direct sunlight. Stroheim tries to open the door while Santana eats away at Joseph, but he too is stopped until Joseph hacks off his leg, freeing him to open the door. Before the sun can do its work, however, Santana contorts himself and hides away in Stroheim. The setup is there, and we've hit a stress point as Stroheim plans to kill himself to expose Santana to the elements. After an exposition dump related to the plot, the grenade goes off. Forced into the open, Santana attempts to kill Joseph and hide in the well all in one clean stroke as he's turned into stone in natural defense against the sun. Ultimately, Joseph prevents Santana from reaching the surface of the water at high noon when the sun is poised to hit Santana the hardest even in the well, and he is defeated. But is it a good fight? The twist and payoff at least don't come from nowhere, but it lacks the control characters had in previous examples. The setting of a military base is used in the introduction, but not in the fight itself except through Stroheim, who also serves as a focal point for the stress. The big plot reveals don't lead much tension to the fight itself either, making the stakes of the scenario feel smaller. In its defense, Joseph is fun enough to carry, but let's move along. Even with Stands, Araki couldn't quite nail it every time. Back in Stardust Crusaders, the gang is on board a ship with a recently discovered stowaway who jumps overboard to escape. Jotaro, whose power is punching things real good, enters the water to save her, but he's attacked by the Stand Dark Blue Moon before returning to deck. Considering that the stowaway could have jumped overboard on purpose to lure someone into the Stand's territory, the gang suspects her of being a Stand user. After Captain Tennille tries to get rid of her, Jotaro claims that cigarette smoke has a unique effect on Stand users by making a blood vein on the nose pop up. Caught by the bluff, the imposter Tennille engages the scenario, attempting to take the stowaway into the water, eventually forcing Jotaro to get dragged under. Through a whirlpool full of sharp scales and a layer of barnacles, Jotaro is unable to get help from the others, the fight reaching a stress point. When Tennille goes in for the kill, Jotaro suddenly makes Star Platinum's fingers extend, hitting Dark Blue Moon and killing him. What? You can tell Araki was still figuring out how to get it right here. The introduction leading up to the captain's status as a Stand user being revealed was good enough that the bluff was lifted into the second OVA series for a different fight. However, the scenario feels wasted. Jotaro ends up in the water twice, which makes the pacing feel a bit disjointed. The exchange seems to be so desperately trying to up the tension, but the payoff is just weak. And it's not even the fact that the justly named Star Finger comes out of nowhere. This new ability is equally unsatisfying in the next fight when he uses it for the second and final time. While JoJo fights have their ups and downs, now I want to look at something completely different. In Kingsman, the Secret Service, a device triggered inside a church of religious extremists sends everyone, including Agent Galahad, into a violent frenzy. Excluding some cuts to the other characters reacting to a live feed, the carnage lasts for the next 3 minutes. While I can appreciate the good editing and composition making it easy to follow what's going on, there's no real ups or downs in the pacing, and Galahad is the only real character involved. I can get why people like this kind of stuff, but all I have to say is, yeah, that was pretty cool, I guess. Of course, there are more to JoJo fights I like than just the structure. The focus on strategy over just being strong is something also shared with Hunter x Hunter. Characters also rarely get stronger, meaning that fights have to be kept interesting by the powers of the antagonist or how their own are used, shared with One Piece. But when I find a fight I really like, it's usually based on the clever, surprising, or otherwise satisfying conclusion. What do you like in a fight? Let me know in the comments and share some of your favorites.